Welcome to Vision in Action Live. Thanks for joining us. We have a presentation today on continuing education for 2024 and a discussion today with Ms. Mimi Cirbusova, a certified financial education instructor. Welcome, Ms. Cirbusova. I'm Jim Boswell. I'm your host and the author of Lifelong Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life. Today's presentation is on continuing education. Why? Because continuing education helps to fill in gaps in your knowledge and experience, improving your prospects and skills for personal development and fulfillment. So let's take a look at the 2024 reading list. Here we have about 14 items, books, and we've broken them up into disciplines. First is economics, and these are among other books, another 165 or so that are on the website, and most of those references also have podcasts integrated into them. So you can either watch it on video or you can read the book. The same is being presented here. So everything you see in parentheses is the podcast version. So one is Aftershock, talking about yourself and how to protect yourself in the next global financial meltdown, assuming that were to happen. These particular PhDs seem to think that is a possibility. Then another has to do with money well spent. You know, how our stimulus from 2007 and 2008 and 9 was spent and what impact that had on our U.S. economy. Thank you for being late. Thomas Friedman is pretty famous for The World is Flat. That's one of his books. And he's very cognizant to speak to the evolution of our industry, technology, and how that impacts everybody's lives. Then there's the do's and don'ts of money. And you'll recognize this name because Susie Orman's been working in this space for better than 30 years. And there's two books there. One's Do's and Don'ts, and one's the money book for the young, fabulous, and broke, which we hope that you are not one of. Let's look at another area. Sociology. Enlightenment Now. This kind of makes a case for reason, science, humanism, and progress. And this is Steven Pinker. And in fact, I've even seen his TED podcast, and he's quite good. The Lexus and the Olive Tree. Again, we're back to Thomas Friedman. This is a little bit of an accident, but it's a different take on how things are changing. The White Man's Burden. This has to do with how, as the West, we have struggled to aid the rest of our population and done such a poor job and done so little good, expending quite a bit of money. The other is a book about the working poor, the invisible people in the United States of America, and how this impacts them. So these are things that are good to have in your knowledge base. Let's look at lifelong fulfillment just as an area. One is essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less. This is Greg McEwen, and it's also available on a podcast version. How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is Dale Carnegie, clear back in 1964, talking about interpersonal relationships. And he certainly was one of the experts. And then there are rules of thumb, how to stay productive and inspired even in the most turbulent time. This is by Alan Weber. And it has some good points, both on a personal and professional basis for you to rely on. And we look a little bit in business and psychology. In business, we look at Irresistible, the rise of the addictive technology that we currently experience and the business of keeping us hooked to it. And in psychology, we look at Drive. This is by Daniel Pink, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. It's always good to know what our personal motivations are and the generic motivations of our population are, both at a personal level and professional. So in conclusion, we just want to suggest to you that these are ones you might want to check out. Again, there's a huge amount of pre-qualified, vetted, authoritative books and podcasts on the website for you to use. You don't necessarily have to do this list. They will ultimately make it to the website lists anyway. You may have your own list depending upon your priorities for education and your unknowns and the things you want to spend your time on. You may have a completely different list. We encourage you to be reading and watching podcasts and expanding your horizons, nevertheless, based on your own focus. We remind you that in the recycling world, recycling bookstores are really a great find if you want to go the book route, and they're easy enough to do. You can check out this for specifics on the continuing education newsletter, which is available at the website lifelongfulfillment.com. We think you'll find it very instructive. Now's the time in our program when we entertain the perspectives of point solution experts and people leading self-directed lives. Today's presentation will be on personal finance, and we're doing that with Ms. Mimi Cirbusova, Certified Financial Education Instructor. Mimi, welcome to Vision in Action Live. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled that I get to chat with you today.
Well, good. I may not have done full justice to your introduction. If there's anything that the audience ought to know about, maybe you could fill us in.
Yeah, sure. So I am a certified financial education instructor, which is just a fancy word for I basically teach people how to not be quite so weird about money and how to manage it in a way that feels in alignment with their lives. I started this because I went on my own debt freedom journey. I was very much a financial scaredy cat most of my life and realized that I needed to change things, but I also didn't want to do it in a way that felt icky and gross, which is kind of what I kept seeing when I would hear those talking heads on TV or on the radio talking about finance. It didn't feel at all connected to my reality. And it also made me feel like there was something inherently wrong with me because I didn't know how to manage money. And the truth is none of us come into this world knowing how to manage money. It's a learned skill. So I started figuring this out. I shared it with other people. And the more I started sharing it, the more I realized I was so not alone in the way that I felt. And it really pushed me to pursue, like I said, becoming a certified financial education instructor so that I could build a community that was hopeful and shame-free and compassionate. So that's why I'm here.
Okay. Well, in the lifelong fulfillment world, we spend a fair amount of the book and newsletters discussing things like personal income statements, looking at, your expenses, at your income, what national averages are here in the US and that sort of thing. So why don't we start with just a real question at the crux is, what about budgets? Do we need to have budgets? And how do you approach that particular subject?
I have so many people that come to me and they go, oh, I tried to have a budget and budgeting doesn't work for me. And, do I really have to budget? And this always kind of piques my curiosity a little bit. I always ask a lot of questions around this. And usually one of the questions that I start with is, well, how many budgeting methods have you tried? And they kind of get quiet and go, oh, is there more than one budgeting method? And it's like, yes, absolutely. There's actually a whole variety of budgeting methods. And I'm not going to get into all of those, but most often folks start with a budgeting method that doesn't fit their brain, their personality, their lifestyle, the types of spending that they want to do. And so they get frustrated and they give up, right? And, I think often another question that kind of comes up is, well, what did that budget look like? And more often than not, folks are just making a list of all of their expenses and calling it a budget. And that's just not what a budget is. Budget is meant to be this map that says, I want to, instead of trying to figure out where my money has gone, I want to direct it and make sure I know it's flowing and going in the directions that I that I choose it to go into, right? And I think the reason so many folks are turned off by that word of budgeting is because it's always portrayed as being this really restrictive, deprivation kind of thing, right? And so they just feel like a budget is so limiting. And really, in actuality, if you're doing a budget the right way, it's a permission slip. A budget is a way to say, hey, this is what's important to me, and this is what I want my money to be doing. And it gives you permission to spend on things that are truly meaningful and joyful beyond just the necessities, right? I think it's, kind of two different pain points that we see where folks kind of have a preset idea of what a budget is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part is they don't really know their true numbers, their real numbers inside and out, and that makes it tricky to budget. So if we can kind of get past those two pieces, budgeting becomes much less scary.
Okay. All right. So, there's I guess budgeting in my mind, I separate the two a little bit in that, there's the written down budget, which, like you say, can be relatively flexible and pretty focused on what you want to be doing. But then there is the issue of living to the budget and my mentality and, when I'm going to pull out my credit card and when I'm going to pay cash and things like that. So maybe you can talk about that transition and that kind of state of mind for us.
Yeah. A lot of folks who struggle to stick with their budget are struggling with not really understanding the connection between their mindsets and values to their behaviors. And we can really work on developing that understanding and building that connection a little bit more strongly. But something I talk about quite frequently is the spending triggers. So when we're looking beyond just like those standard bills that you got to pay, and we're looking at day-to-day spending decisions, many times we feel these urges to spend in ways that are unplanned, right, and unnecessary. And when that comes up, usually there's some kind of spending trigger behind it, and it's this urge to spend. And spending triggers are so often, and it really gets under my skin, but they're often portrayed as these evil, sinister impulses that are just trying to get you, trying to make you, lose your balance, trying to make you go off course. And that's not the fact at all. The truth is, your spending triggers, much like your emotions, are there to be informants. They're there to tell you something. But we're attuned based on social cultural conditioning, based on a lot of different things. We're raised in a culture that says the way you meet your needs is through consuming. The way that you get what you need is through buying and purchasing.
Right.
So when we're trained in that way, we cannot hear what our spending triggers are actually trying to tell us. So we have to work to understand them a little bit better. And when we can understand their messages, it's a lot easier to say, wait a minute, okay, I'm feeling the urge to buy this. What's really going on? Oh, you know what? I haven't eaten since 9 a.m. and it's now 3 p.m., right? I am feeling hunger and I am making poor spending. And I say this as somebody who has a hunger spending trigger. So, it's really important that once we kind of learn how to listen to those spending triggers, and there's a lot of different ones out there, then we can start to develop some better systems to manage them. We can start to go, wait a minute, instead of making this purchase, I'm going to go call my mom because I'm feeling kind of lonely, or I'm going to go and, take a breath. And instead of driving to Kohl's, I'm going to go drive myself to the library and just go browse books for a little bit, right? There's ways that we can achieve more of our goals once we understand what our spending triggers are trying to make us notice. And a lot of times it is needs and desires that we've been told our whole lives we have to solve through spending, and that's just not the truth.
Right. Sounds like retail therapy.
It can be, but it can also be trying to keep up with the Joneses kind of idea.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It can also just be, we may not be able to tune in to our body's cues. Like I said, hunger, being overtired, being overstressed, and learning new ways to deal with those things.
Right, right. Well, sounds like I need this for my Costco trips.
Costco is a great place, but boy, oh boy, it can be
Yeah,
really dangerous sometimes.
yeah, big temptation. So, how do we differentiate good financial advice from bad, or
Yeah,
say not quite as effective? Uh,
sure.
how's
Yeah,
that?
I think it really is important to start off with, if you're listening to someone talk, and now everybody's got great personal stories, and that's wonderful. But
Mhm.
someone's personal experience does not make them qualified to educate or to train or to coach. And it's really important that you look at a few different things. So number one, what is their background, right? In my own journey, I paid off over $20,000 of debt and did it while working mostly part-time at a really teeny tiny nonprofit, right?
Mhm.
And that in and of itself was not enough to make it possible for me to go and teach others. So it was important to me that I go and I got a certification and a qualification to make it possible for me to speak to folks. But even in that itself, there are boundaries to what I can offer and what I can do. So a good place to look if you're not really quite sure what someone's qualifications might be, if they are saying, oh, I'm an expert in this, or I have this qualification, is FINRA, which stands for Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. It's a long word, but basically they
Right.
have an outline of professional designations, and it can tell you a little bit about where did they get that certification, how often they have to renew that certification, right? But I think even more importantly is looking at someone's motivations. I really caution against folks who use very high pressure sales tactics. Now, all of us, including myself, we got to, pay our bills and we got to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves. But if someone is making you feel like they are the only person who can solve your problem,
Right.
and you need to sign up right this minute, be really cautious. Like that's a big red flag. I also would encourage folks to look at how do they accept payment, because someone who uses like Venmo, WhatsApp, Cash App, things like that, you got to kind of question, how legitimate is their business? Have they set it up formally, right?
Right.
A legitimate business does not usually accept payments that way. Also look at what do they give away for free? Is everything behind a paywall, or do they give away information for free that you can actually use and apply for your life? And then I think the other thing is looking at the problems that folks solve. What do they specialize in? For instance, I work with a lot of folks who are in debt, but there are plenty of times that I will say to someone, your specific situation is so complex and so nuanced that it would serve you better to work with someone who's a nonprofit certified credit counselor, right? So I'll refer them to the National Foundation of Credit Counselors and say, hey, this is who you need to speak to instead. If they're
Mm.
not willing to refer you out to other people who might be a better fit, that's another big red flag.
Okay. All right. That's really important information you've just given us. Okay, so let's assume I'm a client that, let's just say I generally am out of control, but not too bad. How would your program work for me? What would you suggest? Where do we start? What is the process
Yeah.
like? Maybe you can help us understand, what a financial instructor is really going to do for my particular financial situation.
Yeah. So a lot of it is based on what is it that you want to achieve and what outcome are you desiring. And I had a moment a while back where I was talking with a lot of clients and I was realizing that many times they would come to me and they would say, I can't believe it's taken me this long to finally figure out my finances. And why did I wait till now? And I would always say, well, you've been climbing all these other mountains. You had the mountain of, becoming a parent, you had the mountain of career, you had the mountain of school, right? All these different mountains. And you're finally here at the money mountain. And I'm just so happy that you're here. And maybe it took you till you were in your 40s or your 50s to get here, but I'm just so glad you're here now. And it was one of those moments when you know that the universe is kind of like just dropping information into your brain. And I realized what the money mountain really looked like. And it's multiple layers of these foundational principles that anyone can learn. And if we can master those foundational basic principles, we can move much more swiftly, and we don't have to get caught up in all the, stuff that's not all that important, right? So the money mountain is this framework that I use with my clients, and we always start with basic survival needs. If you don't know where your next meal is coming from, it does not serve you for me to talk to you about Roth IRAs or high yield savings accounts, right?
Right.
So once we get past that, then the next layer up is, what is your mindset and your values? So many times I'm working with folks on helping them to understand the connection between their mindset, their values, to their spending behaviors and their decisions about money, right? And much of that goes way back into childhood and how it has impacted them, right? Then once we kind of work through that, then we got to get into the real numbers. So the first step is very looking inward, and the next is kind of looking outward and saying, what are your real numbers? What is your income? What are your expenses? How much are you putting into investments or savings, right? Things like that.
Right.
After we kind of establish what is your mindset, what's your values, and then what are your real numbers, then we can get into goals and circumstances, because you can have any goal that you want, but you can't work on all goals all at once, right? Like it's okay to have a lot of different goals, but you're not going to get very far if you're working on 10 different big goals all at one time. And then we each have different circumstances that are going to affect our lives. For instance, I'm a part-time caregiver for someone in my family. That impacts how much time and energy I can be putting into things like growing my income or putting into, finding other streams of income, right? Because time is a resource, right? I'm not a parent yet, but I'd like to be. That's going to impact my finances. And then once we kind of look at those goals, circumstances, we know our real numbers, we have a good understanding of the things that our brain is doing that impacts our financial decisions, then we can get into building wealth. And a lot of people want to start here, but that pinnacle, that top of this money mountain isn't going to go, you're not going to get very far if all these other foundational pieces are weak below it, right? And so I really focus on with folks 3 pieces to building wealth. One is investing, getting to understand the basic foundational steps to good investing skills. The other is saving, looking at long-term and short-term savings, and then credit, because credit impacts so many things in our lives, and understanding how to build credit in a way that is not about hustling and grinding, but about slowly over time showing good credit building skills. So that's really, to me, the framework that I use. And there's lots of different, pathways people can take. But that's always how I'm kind of seeing things at a 30,000 foot level.
Okay. So is there a typical client that comes to you, a typical situation, or is there too much variety to generalize at all?
Well, it's interesting because, I have noticed some similarities amongst the people that reach out to me specifically, right? Most of the folks who are reaching out to me are individuals that are making a decent living. They're earning a decent amount of money. It's not poverty wages, but they are often in a position where they've said, I just don't want to continue struggling with this. I'm great in my career. I'm smart. I'm capable. I'm a high achiever. Many of my clients I've noticed this trend, especially lately. Most of my clients are millennial eldest daughters. Don't know why, it's a thing. But they're very high achievers. They're very capable, very well educated, and they feel like everybody sees this external thing of being such, A+ student, right? All the time, kind of
Sure.
in life and in career. But secretly deep down, they're like, my finances are a mess and I just don't know what to do about it.
Right.
So that's often when I get folks coming to me. But yeah, usually it's dealing with some debt, dealing with not really sure what steps to take to move forward, and just not wanting to be in survival mode anymore.
I see. Okay. Well, that's good. Um, this is an important thing, I think, for those that are pursuing personal development, because at some point finances have to come into play. One
Yeah,
of the things that we emphasize is that, without the financial muscle, your world is a little smaller in terms of how you can set goals and actually achieve goals and prioritize toward those goals. So this is a very important area, in my opinion.
I agree.
So, what other comments would you have for our audience of financial novices?
I think the biggest thing is I really want to emphasize the fact that you don't have to like your real numbers for them to be helpful to you. Many times people are afraid to look at their real numbers, look at where their money is going and flowing, because they're afraid that it's going to say something about who they are. And that's just not true. And everything with finance is temporary. So just because you have a low credit score, or maybe you're in quite a significant amount of debt, or maybe you are dealing with a situation that seems like it's just insurmountable, right?
Mhm.
Everything is temporary. And the trick is really understanding that what is mentionable is manageable. If you can talk about it, if you can look at something in the eye, if you can look a problem in the eye,
Right.
you can deal with it. And if you are in a position where you're just feeling like a financial scaredy cat, I can tell you both from experience and from working with many clients, that's not going to be your forever if you don't want it to be.
I see. Okay. So it's kind of having some faith that you can get through this and get out the other end with a different financial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always tell my folks, like, if you can learn to jump off the diving board, the big diving board in, summer camp as a kid, you can figure out your finances, I promise.
That's good. That's good, Mimi. Okay, so how would people reach you if they're of a mind to reach out based on this discussion?
Sure, absolutely. So the best way to connect with me is always through my website, meadowsweetmoney.com. I have links to everything, including my podcast, as well as my Patreon that supports my podcast. They're a wonderful group of people, and it's such a loving community and compassionate community. I also do different workshops throughout the year. Sometimes, oftentimes, they're free of charge, so you can get connected to that. And then I also have a Substack newsletter. So twice a month on the new moon and the full moon, I send out newsletters that are just kind of more than anything a little pep talk to remind you that finance doesn't have to be scary, and it certainly doesn't have to be the way that you have always heard it to be, right? So it's a lot of fun, and I try to infuse my own like goofy little sense of humor into it as well.
Well, great. We look forward to that opportunity. So thank you so much, Mimi, for joining us today and, giving us some really serious perspectives on finance at a personal level. It's really important, and I'm sure you're doing a great job for all your clients.
Thank
Thanks
you so
again.
much. All right, thanks, Jim.
We'll see you next time. And in closing, I want to thank our guest today, Ms. Mimi Cirbusova. Feel free to give her a call if you're interested. Vision in Action Live podcasts include presentations of important material from Lifelong Fulfillment and interviews with subject matter experts and people already leading self-directed lives. Vision in Action Live podcasts are every week and will be announced in advance. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you found it helpful. You can check out the continuing education newsletter, the book, Lifelong Fulfillment, other collateral materials, and this podcast on the website, lifelongfulfillment.com. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Goodreads, Online Dinner Party with Mark Lee, Doing Business with a Servant's Heart, and the Conscious Living podcast with Jackie Woodside. I'm Jim Boswell, your host. Comments and questions on the podcast or the book are welcome at the website and at jim@lifelongfulfillment.com. Thanks again for watching. We look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Vision in Action Live.